Okay, so I think most of you know I'm Tom Bashofsky, the Director of the Arizona Department of Water Resources. I'd like to welcome all of you here today and those listening to this presentation on the online webinar, and welcome you to this briefing and discussion of the 2019 Pinal AMA model run. I want to recognize County Supervisor Steve Miller, thank him for being here, and talk about our primary mission here today. That's twofold. First, we're here to provide everyone, especially Pinal property owners and other stakeholders, with a deeper understanding of the 2019 model, and in the process, engage with the pending applicants and stakeholders. It's our hope that the presentations that you will be seeing today will help address questions regarding the science behind the model, as well as our application of the model's results. Further, we will air as many of the questions and concerns from the audience regarding the model results as we can here today. We recognize some of the issues raised may need further discussion. At the October 11th meeting of the Arizona House Ad Hoc Committee on Groundwater Supply,
and which models are not plausible, so we don't have to end up going down the wrong path. And then we also look for parameter sensitivity as well. And then once we have a pretty good handle on the groundwater flow system, how it works, and how the model represents that, then we can move on to the next phase and use the model as a projection tool, which we're here to talk about today, especially in regards to the Assured Water Supply Program. And this is just an example differentiating, I'm just going back, differentiating the modeling component side of things versus the programmatic assured water supply assumptions associated with inputs that get fed into the model. And this is an example from one of our models down south. So it represents a 100-year projection simulation using the very same exact model, the same boundary conditions, the same parameters, the same initial conditions. The only difference is we have two different imposed demands, the higher demand in red and then the lighter demand in blue. And so the model was designed to be fairly objective without minimal bias. So, because what we're really interested in looking at is the impact of the projected pumping, not the adverse impacts of the model. And so this is sort of more of a schematic diagram. So here we have the projections, and then we have the Pinal model itself, which again, the Pinal model, just like all of our regional scale groundwater flow models, it's really predicated and designed completely based on available groundwater flow data. For the Pinal model, it largely consists of groundwater levels in all three model layers. We also have flow targets as well to help constrain and calibrate the model. So again, we don't have a dog in the fight. We really the modelers want the models to be as unbiased as possible so we can objectively look at what some of the impacts are regarding the projections. Just a little quick tour of the Pinal AMA before we get going here. So this isn't the whole Pinal AMA, but it represents the active model domain. And so over here you have the Maricopa-Stanfield area, and over here the Eloy sub-basin, and the Gila River is over here, and the Gila River Indian Reservation is up here. The history of the history of the Pinal model is long and deep. It predates me even knowing what a hydrologist was. It goes back almost 30 years. The first model was a two-layer model, and it provided a good foundation for subsequent model development. The main drawback with this earlier version of the model is the fact that it never really established, it was never initialized to steady-state conditions, and had a relatively short transient period. So in this case, the longer simulation period we have to calibrate the model, typically the better it is. And so the first major update was published in 2014, and the primary developer was Xuan Liu. She now works for SRP, and she did an excellent job. We've sort of been testing parameters ever since its release and exploring different techniques, and that model pretty much holds up over the test of time. It's done a remarkable job. And so the steady state period was 1923, and that was the time after the construction of Coolidge Dam and the Hayden-Ashers Dam provided surface water irrigation for the San Carlos project. The calibration is fairly long, 1923 to 2009. And I'll talk a little bit more about the internal and external peer reviews in a little while. And then more recently, we have updated the model to more recent periods. So the transient calibration now goes from 1923 to 2015. And we've incorporated some relatively minor changes in some of the mod flow packages and the solver packages, and we'll talk about that in a little while too. And again, I reiterate what Director Boshatsky said. The Pinal model, it is the best available tool we have. Like all models, it's imperfect, but it is the best. It's been looked over and scrutinized both internally and externally, literally for years and decades. So again, prior to the publication of the model, We had it peer-reviewed externally by the USGS, Stan Leak and Don Poole. Anybody who's modeled in the state knows those gentlemen. We also thought it would be important to get an agricultural engineer's perspective of the model in the report. So it was reviewed by Dr. Edward Martin. And then after the publication of the model report, things began to heat up in Cochise County and Pinal. So the department decided it would be a good idea to have the Pinal model peer-reviewed, professional independent peer review by S.S. Papadopoulos. And the principal behind that was Dr. Matt Tompkin. And they gave us a pretty large peer review report, a couple inches thick. I'm just going to read to you some of the conclusions. The current model structure is adequate for the current model objectives, focusing on regional and sub-regional water budgets and long-term predictions of storage depletion and water level declines over fairly broad areas. And they give a similar comment, too, to the model's capacity to be used for likely predictive scenarios as well. Just getting a little bit more into the guts of the model. Because it was Halloween yesterday, we call this the dead spider diagram, and it represents a very broad-scale global sensitivity analysis. It's more like a traditional sensitivity analysis. It's also, along with nonlinear regression, it's also pretty standard industry practice. But I like this figure particularly because it's simple and it really shows you right offhand what parameters in the Pinal model are sensitive. Pumping, of course, ag recharge. And then we also throw in a couple combinations. I don't want to get into the details, but it explains how, if you think through this diagram, it explains how some of the parameters can interact with each other and counteract each other. So these are some of the things us modelers look at when we put these models together and try to figure out, if we're heading in the right direction. And so since the publication of the 2014 Pinal model, again, we have updated the pumping information, 5 years, ending in 2015, updated recharge estimates, made improvements to the numerical solver. For the calibration period, we use the GMG solver, and some of the modeling staff has worked hard to come up with a little bit higher precision of numerical accuracy in the solutions. And we made some minor revisions to the what we call the CAM grid, the Central Arizona Model Grid, which encompasses both the Pinal AMA and the Phoenix AMA models, or soon to be released Phoenix AMA models. And then we also put together more head targets, and that's largely due to Diane Junker. She did an outstanding job combing through GWSI and looking for head targets screened in all 3 layers of the model as well. And then we also, for projective purposes, we converted specified head boundaries to specified flex. For those modelers in the room, you know I do not like the use and abuse of head-dependent boundaries. So not that specified flex is any panacea, but I think it's a safer bet for long-term projections. So we've worked toward better understanding the flex associated with those boundary conditions. This is an important slide. This represents structural modifications to the model geology. We heard loud and clear from stakeholders that some people had concerns about the depth of the model bottom. So Frank Corkill and John Marua spent several months evaluating and reevaluating new and old logs to come up with the best available information with respect to the model bottoms. And this map here, and it's in the tech report, shows these differences. In general, the cooler the cooler the color, the greater the modification. Not all modifications involve deepening. There were some areas, some pockets where we actually, based on available data, we increased the model bottom. But generally speaking, the model bottom was lowered. And most of that occurred in the Casa Grande Ridge area. And I should note, though, that the model is truncated in these very deep, thick alluvial basins. They go down many, many, many thousands of feet. So we truncated the model bottom of layer 3 at 3,000 feet below land surface. And this is just another map showing, you know, changes that occurred to the modifications of the model. And this is the original model bottom map, and then you can read the legend later on. And then some of the modifications resulted in this over here. And this is sort of another diagram that tries to accentuate the differences between the 2014 geology and the 2019 geology over here. And you can see it stands out pretty clearly, the Casa Grande Ridge, and this is an area that has been subject to unmet demand for projective purposes. So we've done our due diligence, we've looked and relooked at logs, and again, based on a regional scale calibration. Again, the Pinal model was calibrated or tuned to a regional scale. People could probably go in and create a refined grid and look for a local solution and find a more accurate solution, but it might be just more accurate at that one particular area. Again, the context of this model and the context of the Pinal AMA is that it's regional scale and scope, and the model needs to follow that protocol as well. So, and then we really wanted, because the 2014 model, the results of the 2014 model have pretty much stood the test of time pretty well and has been peer reviewed. And we've been working with the 2014 model quite a bit, and a lot of people have seen it. We really wanted to make the modifications to the geology consistent with the 2014 model solution that had been peer-reviewed 3 times. So basically what we did, I'm getting a little bit technical here, but a core parameter in the model is what we call horizontal branch conductance. You might know it as transmissivity, and transmissivity is a product of hydraulic conductivity, which is K, and then B, which is thickness. So any place we made a modification of B, we made a corresponding change in K to come up and end up with pretty much an equivalent T. This T value is equivalent to, it's effectively the same as the 2014 Pinal model K values. There's a before and there's an after shot. And then the bottom line is the residuals. So comparing the let's see, this is the 20, yeah, before the modifications. So this is basically the 2014 model just updated. With the modifications, you can see the residuals, the absolute mean and the mean residuals. And then after the modification, it didn't change the solution too much, which is sort of what we were looking for. And most of those changes occurred in layer 3, where they're saturated. So it was a pretty safe assumption to make the linear calculations to back calculate the modifications in hydraulic conductivity. And so you can go over some of these stats and details in the report. And again, you know, the model, there are outliers that probably, you know, accentuate or exaggerate the absolute mean, but in terms of a regional scale solution, it provides a pretty unbiased fit for the whole Pinal AMA. And this is just a graph showing some of the more recent some of the work that's been done more recently regarding inverse modeling. What we did is we made the Pinal model more parsimonious and basically created zones that could be uniquely estimated in this particular case. And so then what you do is you break these parameters down and you get byproducts from the nonlinear regression process, and these byproducts re-inform you about the nature of the parameters and the nature of the parameters' relationship with other parameters and the observation data. So it really allows you to better understand the model, the area you're modeling, and how the calibration constraint data controls it. And this figure over here, this is just sort of a general depiction of how we calibrate a model, whether it's trial and error based or whether it's nonlinear regression. Typically, when you start off a model, you have high model error, but then as you learn more about the model and the calibration improves, the model error decreases. And this y-axis, by the way, is a log scale. So this drop represents a couple of orders of magnitude in error reduction. And again, as a modeler, what we shoot for is you can never have a perfect model, but we try to minimize adverse bias. And we can live with uncertainty. That's no problem. We just try to avoid adverse bias. And this Pinal model shows, at least on a regional scale context, no signs of exhibiting adverse model bias. And again, this is just the modelers doing their due diligence. We like to look at the parameters, and we like to understand which parameters are sensitive and which parameters are not sensitive, so we know what to adjust, what dials to adjust in the model. And now I'm going to sort of slip a little bit into model speak for the projection period. For the traditional, or for the 2014 model, we use the traditional well package. It's the traditional well package has it has the characteristic where if you assign a simulated model that is screened in a unit and that particular model layer or unit goes dry, the pumping is lost forever. So for the projected period, because we were anticipating significant drawdown, we decided to use the multi-node well package, which preserves as much pumping as possible in the projection period. So in other words, if a model layer goes dry, we retain a little bit of saturated thickness to keep that cell, to keep that cell active, thereby retaining that pumping belonging to that particular cell. So in a nutshell, we basically incorporated the multi-node well package in an effort to minimize the quantity of unmet demand. But you have sort of an interesting relationship, because in the model, for projector purposes, if you simulate more groundwater pumping, the water level is going to drop. So there's sort of an interesting feedback cycle, but we thought it was real imperative to use the best available information to try to get all of that demand out of the model for the projection period. And simulated unmet demand. This is important. I'm probably just going to read directly from the screen here. Simulation of unmet demands occurs when model layers become dewatered. The simulated water level falls below the bottom of the well's perforated depth. The decrease in saturated thickness and corresponding aquifer transmissivity, otherwise known as the formation of a seepage face. So the bottom line is, and Jeff will get into this in much more detail, we still have unmet demand, and it is a problem.
Thanks, Keith. We'll turn it over to Jeff Inwood now to talk about assured water supply results in the Pinal AMA.
I'm going to turn this sideways so you can see my left half of my face and I can still see the screen. Okay, so thank you, Keith. Again, I'm Jeff Inwood, Chief Hydrologist here at the Department of Water Resources. I'm going to pick up where Keith left off and talk about the assumptions that go into the model and the model results, starting with the assumptions. And I'm going to take a little step back and talk how the modeling related to the assured water supply submittals prior to the release of our updated model in 2014. Applicants generally relied on local numeric models or, analytical models. The concern that produced is that you were only looking at small areas, not a regional scale. And especially with the analytical models, the assumptions were very oversimplified. In 2014, as a result where we saw the basin going, we released our 2014 updated model that is a regional scale numeric model. And then the reason why we're here today is to discuss our update here in 2019. And what I want to point out it is a numeric model, but it is a deterministic model, meaning there's one set of assumptions that go into the model and one set of results that are produced. Again, I'll reiterate that we believe this is the best tool available to the department, and we believe it is enhancing consumer protection as part of the Assured Water Supply program. And I just had to throw in the old model, new model comparison of a rotary phone with an analytical model versus the cell phones with a numerical model. Getting into the assumptions, so for existing uses, for existing municipal and industrial uses, we used the 2015 reported pumping data and carried that through the 100-year projection. Let me take a step back. Our historic period for the model is through 2015. Our projection period, I'll be using that a lot, represents 2016 through 2115. That's our 100-year projection. Existing municipal withdrawals for built-out portions of issued certificates are included in that 2015 data that is carried forward, as well as agricultural pumping. Then looking into the future, we have locations where there are Assured Water Supply issued determinations that overlay agricultural lands. So what we did is, after 2015, we shut off the pumping on those wells, and those black circles that you see up there represent the locations where the agricultural pumping was shut off for the projection period. A couple of general agricultural assumptions. Again, we assume that on day one of the projection period, that any Assured Water Supply determination, that it is full build-out at day one, carried through 100 years. So that starts in 2016. And again, we discontinued the agricultural pumping on the wells that overlaid those Assured Water Supply determinations. But in lieu of that, the issued determinations of Assured Water Supply pumping were started on day one. And then another major assumption is that we assume the full ag pool would be available through 2030. We also assume that GSF water to groundwater savings facilities would also be available through the projection period. Looking at these next two slides, we'll deal with some demand estimates for the two largest ag districts in the modeled area, Maricopa-Stanfield Irrigation and Drainage District and Central Arizona Irrigation and Drainage District. What you see on the left is a graph that has three lines. The red line represents demand estimates that were based on information provided by the district. The blue line are demand estimates developed by the department. And the dashed line is the averaging of those two demand estimates. And that's what was used in our model run, the average. The numbers on the right, you can see that both the department and the districts had reduced agricultural production over the 100-year projection. For Maricopa-Stanfield, we're talking from 60 to 70,000 acres down to 20 or 35,000. The associated water demands reduced anywhere from over 250,000 to around 100,000. As you see that at the bottom, the average is 260,000 down to about 112,000. Here are the same information for the Central Arizona Groundwater Irrigation and Drainage District. The estimates between the department and the district were a little closer in this run, or for this district. Again, a significant reduction on average from 287,000 acre-feet approximately to 172,000 by the end of the projection period. forgot to point out that in the far left you see a very steep decline. That decline corresponds with the elimination of the CAP Ag Pool deliveries. For the Gila River Indian community, there were plans. This is somewhat outdated, but there was a plan in the near past that had them increasing their total agricultural production acres up to 146,000 or so. What we had to do is, because part of the community's ag lands are located outside of the Pinal model area, and it's about 89% of the community's ag lands are located inside the Pinal model area. So if you take roughly 89% of 146,000, you'll get about almost 130,000 acres. That's the amount of ag lands we modeled in the 2019 run. And over the 100-year projection period, the total water demands on the community would range from 266,000 acre feet a year up to 476,000. Another assumption that we made is that we simulate full use of the community's CAP supply starting in 2029. It ramps up between 2016 and 2029, but we only applied the port 89% of their total CAP supply, and I think that comes out to about 277,000 acre feet a year. I won't run through all these data points, but for the other districts within the modeled area, for Hohokam, the total demand that was modeled and held constant for each year was 57,000 acre feet approximately. For San Carlos, it's a little over 86,000 a year. For Ak-Chin, it's 72,000, but that is all CAP water. And then for non-district and non-tribal irrigation grandfathered rights, it's 27,000 acre feet a year. And we removed any assured water supply overlays to come up with that demand. And again, that was held constant through the projection period. So looking at what the total groundwater demand is for agriculture in the modeled area for the projection period, that's what the blue line there represents. The red line, not surprising, represents the 2030 when the ag pool ends. So there's a very steep increase in the groundwater demand that occurs in that after 2030. However, you'll see generally there's a downward trend long-term over the 100-year projection period. I'll point out, you'll see three what I call humps. The first one starts where it says 552, 449, and then there's two more after that. Those reflect the surface water that's available on the Gila River. In our model, we used a 16-year repeating pattern covering the 1995 to 2010 period. So because that repeats every 16 years, you will get the same results. Obviously, where it peaks and the groundwater demand increases, that means those were times of low surface water flows. Where the groundwater demand goes down were times when there was increased surface water available. So this is kind of a summary of where all the water comes from to meet the agricultural demands, and you can see the total. I'll try to point out a couple of things. The blue area represents groundwater, which is obviously the largest component. The brownish above the blue represents surface water. The I'll call it the darker greenish yellow in the corner. The low corner right there represents the CAP Ag Pool, and then the lighter greenish color represents the CAP GSF water. So, and as you can see, we're talking about total supply use of, over 1 million acre feet a year. So now I'm going to move on to the M&I side, and particularly the assured water supply assumptions associated with new uses. The next slide will go through the numbers, but just here are some of the information behind the numbers. So for analyses of assured water supply, we modeled all the issued demand minus any certificates that have been issued against those analyses. For the certificates, we modeled all unbuilt estimated demand, and the way we determined that is we did an analysis in 2017, basically counted the number of homes that were built in the certificated areas and calculated a demand for those and took it away from the certificated volume. Then what you see on the left, the map shows the places where the new wells were put in, and those are put in inside the development footprints for the certificates and analyses. The analyses are the orange circles, and they're overlaying the footprints of the analysis applications, or determinations, I should say. The blue dots represent the certificates, and then you'll see some black dots that represent the wells for designated providers. But again, focusing on the analyses and certificates, those are put on the development footprints as that's the assumption we made. Looking at the designations, we modeled the full designated volume for each designated provider, and we assumed that that pumping would continue in their existing wells. A couple of quick points about some of the designated providers. City of Eloy has a pending modification application that reduces their demand significantly, and we modeled that lower demand in our run. And then secondly, we've been made aware of a correction that we needed to make to the amount of demand, groundwater demand, that we include in the model. We originally included their full designated demand, and we've been made aware that a portion of that total demand comes from effluent. So I think the numbers are roughly 22,000 acre feet of total demand and only 17,000 acre feet of groundwater. So we've overestimated the groundwater pumping for their designation, and we will correct that. Last thing, we have a pocket around the Saskatoon Mountains that is not within our model domain. But there are developments that have been issued that have assured water supply determinations that have been issued, a large analysis for Copper Mountain and some couple of certificates. The wells that are associated for those developments, since they're outside of our model domain, we move them into our model domain into cells that right inside our model domain. So here are the numbers that come out of those assumptions that I just described. You can see we've got them broken down by the analyses, certificates, and designations. We have the count. You can see for the analyses what our issued demand was. We have our certificated demand, which take that away, and you get a total model demand of almost 117,000 acre feet a year. Over 100 years, that's close to 12 million acre feet. Same thing for the certificates. However, you will note that the issued demand minus the built-out demand does not equal the total demand. It's actually the built-out demand. We did an analysis that used CAGRD records of deliveries, replenishment deliveries, to represent what was pumped, as well as a reduced demand calculator. So the actual use was less than what was in the issued demand. It's not a lot. It's about 1,000 acre-feet, but a year. But we did represent that. So there, with the certificates, you're looking at just under 5 million acre-feet of total demand over 100 years. And the designated providers, very similar, almost 50,000 acre-feet a year, almost 50 million, or I'm sorry, almost 5 million over 100 years. And then the lower right is the total modeled demand, 100-year demand for the assured water supply sector, 21.5 million acre-feet. Keep that number in mind. I'll be referring to it again here in a little bit. Long-term storage credit removal. So we have to, per requirements, we have to remove long-term storage credits that have been stored because applicants cannot rely on long-term storage credits that have been stored by others. So we do that. I'll try to be brief. What we did first is, through 2015, there were a number of credits, long-term storage credits, that were accrued at underground storage facilities, and that was about 14,500 acre-feet through 2015. For water stored through groundwater savings facilities through 2015, excluding any CAGRD long-term storage credits, it's about a 1.15 million acre-feet. And so what we did to simulate we simulated those quantities being removed from the model at a uniform rate over 100 years. So that total 1/100th each year was removed from the model. Then for the future, during the projection period, we assumed that groundwater would be stored at groundwater saving, long-term storage credits would be accrued at groundwater savings facilities through the projection period, and we would remove that water in the same year that it was stored. But we only removed 95%, and we kept 5% in the aquifer to represent the cut to the aquifer. Since we're treating them as long-term storage credits, that's why we use the 95% versus 100% removal. So in total, about 4.4 million acre-feet of long-term storage credits were accrued at GSFs and then removed during the projection period, with about 231,000 acre-feet of the cut to the aquifer, so those credits that remain in the aquifer. And we did not simulate long-term storage credit accrual at USFs in the future during the projection period. Our assumption dealing with replenishment obligations at the Central Arizona Groundwater Replenishment District, we utilized their 2015 plan of operation number for the Pinal AMA of 15,500 acre-feet per year. They had a total of a little over 320,000 stored through the end of 2015. And so what we did is we used those credits first, and we applied those to the early years of replenishment obligations in the projection period at a rate of 15,500 a year. So basically what that gets you is a little over 20 years of replenishment obligations met with the existing credits that are already accrued. And then we to cover the other years in the projection period, we simulated CAP water storage at GSFs at 15,500 acre-feet a year. And they were, we tried to place those credits or the deliveries to the irrigation districts closest to where the demands are incurred. Some general recharge projection assumptions. The incidental agricultural recharge was applied evenly across the irrigated lands at a rate of 34%. Historical data, recent historical data indicated overall irrigation efficiency due to flood irrigation dominance of about 66%. So therefore, the remaining 34% is considered to be incidental recharge. For the projection period, we did not lag this recharge, meaning once that water is applied, it's deemed to be in the aquifer. For stream and canal recharge, we followed a pattern from 1995 to 2010, and then these other minor recharge types, urban, mountain front, and recharge at Picacho Reservoir, were the same values that were used in the 2014 model. And on the right, you can see a graph that depicts the source of the recharge. The green is the agriculture. The dark blue is stream, and the light blue is canal. So this kind of ties the recharge, the figure on the left kind of ties the recharge and the pumping together. So the black line represents all types of recharge and this goes back, this is for the projection period from the red, I'm sorry. Yeah, it goes to the far left, goes all the way back to the beginning of the calibrated model, 1923. The red line represents the end of 2015, so everything to the left is historic, everything to the right is the projection period. The green area represents agricultural pumping. In the lower right, the mustard color represents the demands associated with issued analyses. The blue is demands represented by certificates of assured water supply, and the black is the designation volume. So since these are starting on day one of the projection, that's why they are only starting there and carried through the rest of the projection period. The other colors above the green, give me just a moment, I've got those. The pinkish there is municipal, the yellow is industrial, and the purple is long-term storage credit removal. And the basic takeaway from this figure is in the historic period, you can see that agricultural pumping far exceeded the overall recharge. You do see the large recharge spike represented by the 1993 flood. So there was a short period where recharge was dominant over the pumping, but then come beginning of our projection period, the recharge is dwarfed by the overall pumping, meaning an overdraft. On the right is just a bunch of circles representing the pumping locations and the removal of groundwater throughout the projection period and the different types of sectors that the pumping represents. We're going to talk more about that later. So the size of the circle represents the magnitude. I know it's hard to read. This is in the report, so you can dive into that if you so desire. So with all those assumptions, now I'm going to kind of summarize the 100-year demands by sector. Again, on the left side of this is all the assured water supply demands, projected demands. Again, as I mentioned earlier, for those, it's 21.5 million acre feet, which represents 27% of the total, which is at the bottom. Hopefully everybody can see that. It's 80.6 million acre feet of total demand over 100 years. On the right are the other sectors. Definitely want to point out that if you look at agriculture, it is by far the largest demand sector, of 60%, 48.5 million acre feet. The municipal demands and industrial demands add up close to 5 million acre feet, and then the long-term storage credit removal is almost 5.8 million acre feet. So this is what is represented over the 100 years of pumping in the model. Taking these demands, we put it in the model and run with the assumptions we have, and you can see first we have the 80.6 million acre feet of total demand, and then in the model run we can only simulate 72.5 million acre feet, which leaves the difference between those two numbers is what we term unmet demand. It's the total demand minus the simulated demand of about 8.1 million acre feet. Essentially, the quick definition for unmet demand is you cannot achieve your total pumping. Then if you look at the total unmet demand of 8.1 million acre feet roughly, you can break it down into the individual sectors. The assured water supply unmet demand component is just under 2 million acre feet. The largest sector of unmet demands is represented in the agricultural sector with a little over 5 million acre feet of unmet demand, and then some minor unmet demands related to the long-term storage credit removal, as well as existing M&I uses. So that is what is creating the issues that the director mentioned earlier about insufficient water availability. Now we'll kind of look at this graphically and over time. Again, the line in the middle there represents the end of the historic period and the beginning of the projection period, 2015, 2016. So everything to the left is the historical information. What the red line represents is the simulated demand. The blue line represents the total demand. So right where you see the vertical line, you can see there's a big jump in both the unmet demand and, the simulated and total demands. That's again due to the imposition of the assured water supply demands from day one of the projection period. And then as you go out to the right, you can see that roughly in the 2030 area, again, there's another spike and that is tied to, again, the ag pool being eliminated. And shortly thereafter, we start to see the divergence between the simulated and the total demand, and that difference between the red line and blue line represents the unmet demand. And so we can see the unmet demand starting shortly after 2030, which is not that far from now. And you can see that gap widens over time, so that it gets worse over the 100-year projection. Further, looking at where the unmet demand occurs, again, I've put up the same thing that Keith mentioned about what creates unmet demand, just for reference, but looking at the figure on the left, I'll go through this. Where you see the yellow or orangish circles, those are related to analyses of assured water supply. The blue dots represent locations where certificate of assured water supply pumping is represented, and the black dots, the dark black dots, represent the designated pumping locations. Then you will see when they're printed, they look gray. Here they look kind of tannish. The circles that do not have a dark circle around them, those represent the non-assured water supply unmet demand locations. And the majority of that is related, as we saw with the largest sector being agriculture. That's what's driving the majority of those locations in their unmet demands. Some takeaways on this is that the majority of the assured water supply unmet demand is occurring right in the center, or in the Casa Grande Ridge area. Again, it's a bedrock high area of only hundreds of feet of aquifer thickness, versus in between the Maricopa Sandfield subbasin and the Eloy subbasins that are deep. Basically, there just isn't a lot of aquifer to pump from, so you have a lot of unmet demand associated with the assured water supply sector in that Casa Grande Ridge area. Not surprising, the non-assured water supply, or mostly ag unmet demand, is located in each of the subbasins where the aquifer is deeper, but given that the wells may not be deep enough, that they have created unmet demand as well. And what I want to point out here is that, the reason for doing this regional model was to incorporate all of these demands and see how the demands are reflected, unmet demands are reflected across the modeled area. And it points out that we have issues pretty much throughout the modeled area. Here is another figure from our report. The figure on the left is the depth to water for the regional aquifer in 2015 at the start of the projection period. The middle figure is the depth to water at the end of the projection period, 21-15. And the figure on the right shows the change. What this points out, the cooler colors are obviously shallower depth to water. The warmer colors represent deeper depth to water. And that's on the first two graphs. On the right, the darker the color indicates the greater change in depth to water. First, I'll point out in the Eloy area, you can see that it's red, and that would be exceeding the Pinal AMA depth to water limit of 1,100 feet. And then our model indicates that the maximum depth to water in this area is about 1,250 feet below land surface. So in those areas, we would be exceeding the depth to water limit for assured water supply purposes. As you move north from the Eloy area, we still are having some depth to water in the 400, 500, 600 foot range. We also see out in the Maricopa Stanfield Basin that we are getting even deeper, approaching the 800, 900 foot levels, and up in the northwest portion of the Pinal modeled area along the Gila River, the water levels are not as dramatically declining. Next, we wanted to just depict some groundwater observed and projected conditions in some select wells at different locations throughout the modeled area. In each of these graphs that you see up here, the blue lines represent the observed water level data, and the red represents the simulated. Obviously, the blue only goes through a historic period, and then you can see the projections go out through the 100-year projection period. Pretty clear, I think, what this shows. The two on the bottom on each side, which represent the Casa Grande Ridge area, the Eloy subbasin area, and the Maricopa Stanfield area, all show significant groundwater declines over the 100-year projection period. Ironically, along the Gila River, we don't see as significant declines over the 100-year projection. And in fact, they're showing some stability over the total time period. So I wanted to point out this graph, and really all wanted to, or table I should say, is direct you to the total row at the bottom. What this is basically representing is our simulated loss of water and storage. If you look in the historic period over 93 years to 1923 to 2015, there's a loss of 17 million acre feet. In the projection period, it increases over 100 years to 27.5 million acre feet, for a total over that 193 years of close to 45 million acre feet of water lost from storage. Without getting into the interbed or non-interbed storage, what this means is we are, or not we, but the pumping, both historically and projected, is mining large amounts of groundwater, and we still cannot simulate all the demands. We still have significant unmet demands. And what that tells us is that really this is a wet water issue, not necessarily a model issue. So finally, I'm going to show an animation that will show the depth to water on the left side of this animation. On the right side will be the saturated thickness above 1,100 feet. And this will be a year-by-year progression of the change of depth to water and saturated thickness over 100 years. You'll also see, as time goes, that circles will start popping up, and those represent the unmet demands, locations of unmet demand. I'll let it run, and then I'll talk about it after. Again, cool colors are shallow depth and greater saturated thickness. Warm colors are deeper depth of water and decreasing or less saturated thickness. So I want to give a shout out and a thank you to Diane Juncker for preparing this. I think it's very telling. It shows how things change over time. The figure on the left, the depth of water, is the same. You've seen that. I showed that earlier. The figure on the right with the saturated thickness shows that in the Eloy area there is no saturated thickness. There is some in other places throughout the modeled area, but really then the outcome is that the over 8 million acre feet of unmet demand. So I'll play it one more time just for effect. So again, this is the end result after the 100 years of model simulation. Finally, the technical memorandum is out. I think everybody's aware of that, but also wanted to make sure everyone's aware that our model files and GIS data are also on our website and available. And that's the end of my presentation, Director.
Thanks, Jeff. Before we get into the question and answers, talk about a few potential next steps or things we want to share with you. So we're going to talk about the state's guiding principles for potential future solutions, the proposed 2019 Pinal stakeholder group, pending application process, and a groundwater redistribution substantive policy statement. So again, as we have been thinking about DWR's role in the proposed local stakeholder, we came up with these two guiding principles for any future solutions to the groundwater physical availability issue in Pinal. And first, we must continue the state's commitment to upholding the consumer protection and water sustainability objectives of the Assured Water Supply Program. Second, the stakeholder process should be community-driven. The state's role will be to provide assistance and comment on proposals. So a little bit about the proposed Pinal stakeholder group. And really this came from the October 21st hearing that Chairman Cook held down in Florence. So a Pinal Active Management Area Stakeholder Group has been proposed by Representative Cook, Chairman of the Arizona House Ad Hoc Committee on Groundwater Supply in Pinal County, to address the Assured Water Supply groundwater physical availability issue. Representative Cook further proposed that the stakeholder group be chaired by Pinal County Supervisor Stephen Millers, and that Bill Garfield of Arizona Water Company and Jake Lenderking, Director of Water Resources at Global Water, serve as co-vice chairs. Representative Cook requested that those proposed leaders provide him with a roadmap for the stakeholder group, and I hope I accurately describe that shorthand version of what Representative Cook asked for. So we want to talk with you also about a draft priority policy that DWR has prepared. It's a substantive policy statement for stakeholder input. The draft policy establishes guidelines that could be used by certificate applicants relying on a previously issued analysis and designation, and designation applicants relying on a previously issued designation. The draft policy allows certificate and designation applicants relying on a previously issued analysis or designation to submit a hydrologic study or model run, excluding analyses issued after their previously issued analyses or designation. So it is a priority policy. This draft policy is going to be posted on our website after this meeting, but we wanted to make sure folks understand that even with all the issued analyses removed from the model run, there will likely still be unmet demand in the model. We have not yet evaluated whether any assured water supply determinations could be issued, even with the implications of this substantive policy statement. But it was a way for us to find maybe one small path forward to move some of these to a positive outcome. So for pending and future applications, 2019 model run does not include new groundwater pumping for any pending applications. This is really about the Eloy modification. More importantly, given the significant volume of unmet demand for issued assured water supply determinations, it is unlikely that pending or future assured water supply applications can demonstrate physical availability of groundwater without significant changes in groundwater demands of existing uses and issued assured water supply determinations, new water supplies, and/or legal changes. So the 2019 Pinal AMA model run does not demonstrate physical availability of groundwater for any pending assured water supply applications. Applicants may still elect to have their applications remain pending while the stakeholder process progresses. DWR will continue to extend the time period for the demonstration of physical availability until further notice. But applicants may seek to demonstrate physical availability of groundwater for pending applications using DWR's 2019 Pinal AMA model and subject to the existing requirements for groundwater modeling and the assured water supply rules. I recommend that if you go down that path, that applicants consult with DWR prior to undertaking any modeling effort. ADWR does not anticipate that modeling efforts are likely to be successful under the current circumstances, and we went through with you in great detail and probably in a repeated fashion the reasons for that last statement. We also wanted to alert you to another substantive policy statement recently promulgated. On October 28th, DWR issued a substantive policy statement entitled Guidelines for Redistribution of Groundwater Pumping in Hydrologic Studies for Assured and Adequate Water Supply Applications. It provides guidance to assured and adequate water supply applicants seeking to geographically redistribute groundwater pumping in 100-year assured water supply groundwater model projections. This policy is applicable statewide, inside and outside the AMAs, and it can be found on DWR's website at the following link, and that's a big, long link, but I think you could also find it going through the Assured Water Supply Program part of our website or our Hot Topics part of our website as well. So with that, I'm going to sit back down, and it is time for you all to ask us questions. I would ask those of you who do have a question to come to this podium, introduce yourselves, and let us know who you represent. I'm getting up. Attorney.
Questions are quite easy. This is Michelle Van Quatham of the law firm of Michelle Van Quatham, who I'm representing. The first question is, I would like to get a copy of the map that shows the locations of unmet demand. Will that be made available on the website?
It's in the report.
Okay. Thank you. And the other questions are, Tom's presentation was rather quick. I was hoping we could also see the slides that he put up about his proposed process quickly, and then the draft policy when available. Where will that be? Or is that in the slides?
The draft policy will be posted on our website. I think the easiest way is go to look to Hot Topics regarding the ad hoc committee, and it will be linked through there.
Just for clarification, this slide presentation that you've seen today will also be on the website.
Rob
Anderson with Fenimore Craig here on behalf of Home Builders Association. I'm going to preface my questions by saying I'm not advocating a particular position. I'm just trying to understand the model and just make sure, because this is what we need in order to go into the stakeholder discussions. The first question relates to effluent, and maybe I just missed it, but was there a discussion of how we're treating effluent in the model?
No, there wasn't a discussion, but the model only simulates effluent that's included in designations.
Effluent is included in designations. So to the extent that there's a groundwater demand for all those certificates, designations, analyses, and those are ultimately built and generating effluent, that's not considered in the model.
Not unless it's included in the designation.
Okay, thank you.
And can I just? And that's where I did acknowledge that we did not include the effluent that was in Global Santa Cruz's designation. So
you did not include the
right. Effluent. That was an error on our part.
Okay. Okay.
So, but we would represent that in the modeling.
Okay.
So, Rob, I will also add, and I think hopefully I made this statement or close to it. in one or more of the legislative hearings, I think, criteria in which the department would include effluent other than in the designations, I think we're willing to discuss as part of the stakeholder process, certainly. And I think it's about the certainty that that effluent will be there, the timing of when it will be there, and that the infrastructure to deliver it to where it needs to be done will be done in the same kind of timing and in the right place at the right time. Right. Or off the top of my head, some of the things we need to think about.
Sure. And, I guess I'll just take the opportunity to say if the houses are there and they're pumping groundwater, they're generating effluent, and that effluent is not leaving the basin. So there's sort of a common sense approach to rolling that in the model. How that affects the model, would it help to save it? I don't know. That was just one issue. Second issue, and this is the GRD associated demands. The GRD demands that are introduced in the model are from the plan of operation, and so I take that to mean the plan of operation is a 10-year plan. The GRD is required to make some assumptions regarding what the current demands at the outset of the plan are, and then how much water is going to be used by entities that join the GRD from 2015 through the 20-year period. And the plan is supposed to demonstrate that they'll be able to replenish the amount of groundwater that is required by those entities that are joining. So that's where the 15, when you are looking into the 2015 plan of operation, that's all that happens. So houses that are built 40 years from now wouldn't be in that number. And if there's any replenishment obligation associated with those houses, that replenishment water wouldn't be in that number. And if the GRD fails and isn't operating and the house is obligated to do replenishment and can't do it, it couldn't get built. So that's my question is, what we've really done here is looked out on what the 20-year development prospects are for the GRD, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Last question, and this is, I always tell my clients I have a law degree so I can practice hydrology. So they don't want to pay me for that for whatever reason.
So I can practice law then?
No. You have a law degree, you can do anything. That's it's a very arrogant profession. The unmet demand. This is a very, very technical question. I didn't quite grasp what you meant by the unmet demand when the well gets down to a certain below the perforated level of the well. I didn't understand. Does that mean that you're making an assumption that the well can't go deeper?
When we're talking about going below the depth of the well, we're talking about existing wells. So if a well is only drilled to 300 feet, once the water table in the simulation drops below 300 feet, the well can't produce anymore. We do not automatically deepen the well. Okay. For new wells, we screen those across all three layers. Okay. So, we do not assume that existing wells are going to be deepened. Okay, so if the well, and again, this is just trying to understand the technical nature of this. If the well can't be deepened, and you're assuming that it won't be deepened, how is it an unmet demand? Wouldn't the demand stop? The water demand is based on. Well, we're trying to get more.
Granted that a municipal demand is assumed to be perpetual, but an agricultural demand is assumed to phase out. So if you have a well, you assume that it still keeps pumping, and that's a gap in the model.
It can't keep pumping because the water level drops below the bottom. We want to get a certain volume out of a well. Okay. And if once it reaches the bottom of the well, it can't pump anymore. Then there's. Got it. That is unmet.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I had.
I see another hand raised, Bill Garfield.
Good afternoon, Bill Garfield. I'm with Arizona Water Company. Question I have is, concerning the unmet demand, is there a way to delineate the unmet demand, distinguishing them between where it's limited due to depth to bedrock, or depth where you've exceeded the well depth, or where it's come up against the 1,100 foot below land surface limitation? So that would be helpful from two perspectives. One, as the local stakeholder group is trying to find solutions to the problem, which we believe will probably be regional in nature, it would be helpful to that. And I also think for making comments on the policy of redistributing groundwater pumping, it might be helpful in that regard as well. So if the department's able to delineate or distinguish those, that would be helpful.
Yeah, we will have to meet internally to further discuss that, but we will look at all the criteria we need to.
And try to evaluate that.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't think we have to go through a sensitivity analysis to see how accurate those representations are, but it would be helpful to know in general where we're talking about, where those are limiting factors.
Yes, and we will follow up with that. Thank you.
One point of clarification: if it goes below 1,100 feet, that's not unmet demand. It's just you've exceeded the depth. So the unmet demand will be if the well depth is exceeded.
So let me clarify what I'm asking for then. So could we also know where, if it's not part of the unmet demand, can we at least see where within the, at the end of the 100-year model run, where the depth to 1,100 feet has been met or exceeded in the model? Yeah, I think those are three areas.
Which we have.
Yeah.
It's really only in the Eloy. It's only in the Eloy area currently, the way we run the model. We have other over here. You're pushing 700 feet, so you're getting close. But really, the only exceedances are down and around Eloy in the red area there.
So am I correct in assuming then that the unmet demand is solely limited to depth to bedrock or depth below the perforated depth of the well?
Well, yeah, or the seepage face, where the aquifer cannot transmit enough water to meet the demand. Okay. So that, yeah, it can't get the water out due to the aquifer transmissivity.
And then I also, since I have the microphone up here, I believe, I'm a numbers guy, but part of the unmet demand was M&I demands roughly 800,000 acre feet over the 100-year modeling period. Was that 700 and some thousand, 782,000? Right. So those are M&I uses. I'm assuming that could be an Arizona Water Company or another municipal provider, and assuming again where the well isn't deep enough, correct? And I'm not sure. We've replaced a lot of wells over the years, and in some cases it was due to rising water levels because the water quality changed so dramatically when the introduction of cap water came into the area. So 100-year period, we will have the opportunity to replace each well at least twice, probably within a 100-year period. And so I'm just wondering if that's something that would be. I mean, it's only 800,000 acre feet. It's 10% roughly of the total unmet demand. I understand. I don't like any declining water levels. I'm just saying, from as the group starts tackling the issue, I think they need to know as much of the information as possible and what kind of solutions may be brought to bear as a group consider what we might need to do.
Well, I guess I'll say that that's probably something that can be discussed in the stakeholder group, and we're open to looking at ways to better reflect the real conditions and your projections, what you're going to do in the future. Right now, through the program, all they have to do is get you to sign that you're going to serve them, and they can, and then the applicants and their consultants put the wells where they want the pumping, where they think it'll go best. So So there are opportunities to incorporate the water company, the water providers, future plans into where we can model the demand. So we're open to that, to discussing that.
Very good. Thank you. Those are my questions.
Cheryl, hi. And then Mike.
With a law degree, you can do anything, Tom. I'm Cheryl Sweeney with Riley Carlock Nampa White. A question for you, Tom. Is it the department's thought that for someone to get a certificate issued from an existing analysis or some new assured water supply mechanism, you're going to have to show that all of the unmet demand has been cured, or only the assured water supply demand?
So since I'm not a lawyer, I'll let a lawyer answer a lawyer question.
We are not requiring applicants to resolve the unmet demands for the agricultural pumping, but we are expecting that the unmet demand would be resolved for the assured water supply category and the existing M&I uses, which are also an overlap with assured water supply. We haven't had a conversation about the long-term storage credits. So we haven't had a conversation yet about the long-term storage credits, but just to clarify for those who didn't hear me, we do need to resolve the unmet demand for the assured water supply category, also for the existing M&I uses, which have an overlap with assured water supply determinations, and we do not require applicants to resolve unmet demands associated with agricultural pumping.
Thank you. A question maybe for you, Jeff or Keith. When we were talking about unmet demands and you had the map up that was showing the Casa Grande Ridge, can you tell me where that is?
Well, okay. So really, if you see this hole in the model area, if you kind of go straight down from each side, that basically represents the Casa Grande Ridge. I'm going to go back to yes. Yes. So there, so these are tilted. This shows a vertical exaggeration, but here's the hole right here that I just referenced, and if you go down each side, to me it's obvious that you can see that this is higher than these areas down here. So this floor that's flat there, we truncate the model at 3,000 feet. So this is much higher, and it's only hundreds of feet deep below from land surface. So does that answer?
Yes, thank you.
Mike.
Good afternoon. My name is Mike Pierce, representing a few water-hungry people in Pinal. This is more a question as to alternatives that might arise in the process, but there are a lot of long-term storage credits accrued and to be accrued in the Pinal AMA. I see there was also a shortfall in some small amount of the long-term storage credits that are already accrued. If an assured water supply applicant were to acquire 100 years worth of long-term storage credits sufficient to support a certificate of assured supply, would the area of hydrologic impact for recovery of those credits be, as I understood it, the irrigation district, for example, where the long-term storage credits were accrued by application of the groundwater savings facility permit? That's a very large area, obviously, and would provide a very useful tool in recovering those credits
within the area of hydrologic impact, which according to the rules is deemed to be physically available without further hydrologic proof.
What is your question?
Two questions. Are you going to honor the deemed physically available of long-term storage credits within the area of hydrologic impact? And is that area of hydrologic impact the GSF in which those credits were accrued?
So I don't think that the area of hydrologic impact is necessarily the boundary of the GSF or the irrigation district in every instance. So we would need to take a look at your particular long-term storage credits and where you're planning to recover them.
And how would you go about trying to find where the water was actually stored in a groundwater savings facility when it was commingled? And I don't necessarily expect an answer to the question, but I think it's something that needs to be thought about considerably in the stakeholder process. So I appreciate it if you would put some attention to that. And also, in that same vein, if that water is deemed to be physically available, being a recovered long-term storage credit, can it support a certificate of assured water supply if it is introduced into a commingled system that is partly reliant on groundwater?
The department has taken the position that water, if commingled water is going to be delivered to a proposed subdivision, that water is physically commingled, which would include groundwater in every instance I've seen. And in that case, the physical availability of that groundwater would need to be demonstrated.
So even if you bought 100% of your projected demand for the certificate, if it goes into the commingled system, you will still face the physical availability challenge that's presented here?
That's correct.
Thank you.
I don't have a question, but I do have a statement related to some of the questions that Mike was asking. I would like all the stakeholders to think about how we can fix the commingling issue because it's causing a lot of problems in many different contexts. And it's not necessary in all circumstances, in my opinion. I know the department disagrees with me to consider commingling. And I'd like to see us possibly resolve that legislatively. So if you have any thoughts, I'd appreciate sharing them.
Doug.
First of all, sorry about that. Make a loud noise. Rob, I just want to give a shout out to you. I was having trouble getting an appointment with my podiatrist, so I'll be giving you a call shortly. First of all, the staff, putting these models together is a ton of work. I know the time and effort that went into that. It goes back years. There's tons of detail that has to go into this. And frankly, there's no better crew on the planet, I think, to put some of these things together. So one question on the modeling side, the historical modeling that was done kind of helped spur the rule modifications in the mid-2000s, early 2000s. The way to make that work with observed water levels was to lag the ag recharge, and so obviously you guys haven't done that this time. What's the difference? Is it just the difference in the modeling?
You mean why did we not lag the incidental recharge?
That's correct.
We just didn't. So that's the bottom line. The uncertainty probably was the main driving factor. And if anything, it's probably a generous contribution to the aquifer.
Okay. My understanding now, Tom, is that in order for the designations to be re-examined, basically all the demands from the existing issue determinations were put in at the same time. And there really hasn't been any examination yet of when those original issuances were happening, and I'm getting to the priority date. So is that what happened with the demands from the projection period moving forward? So under the Assured Water Supply rules, when you have competing applications, the priority date goes to the application that was first complete and correct. It sounds like in this model run, all of the issue determinations were put in at the same time. Is that correct?
Yes, they all kick in on.
Okay, so there was no attempt to go back and find when the first, let's say the first failure, the first time that an application started exhibiting unmet demand.
Correct.
Okay. And then lastly, was there any attempt for existing determinations to go back in history? Some of those obviously have had projected wells in place instead of just relying on existing wells. Was there any attempt to try to go back and match with the original issuance of those determinations versus just relying on existing wells?
You mean the wells that were in the applications themselves, listed in the applications, or just any existing well?
Right. So, for example, if you had a designation that when the application originally came through, they may have 3 existing wells, and then had a projected well to be placed in the future. So you in this run, you just relied on just the existing wells.
For designations only, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, that's what I'm worried about right now.
So for designations, wells that had reported use in 2015, we assigned the future pumping to those wells.
Okay. That's all my questions for the moment, but thanks.
My name is Shuyin Liu, and representing SRP. I have one question. I was the modeler who originally developed this model, and as a modeler, I'm kind of care more about the physical pumping. Even now, I'm still not very familiar with the water rights. Sometimes for CEP, we have some, credits, and we have some physical pumping, we have some paper pumping, right? So one question I have is when I read the technical memo, it says at the beginning of the 2016, there's nearly 1.5 million acre-feet long-term storage credits. And some of them is kind of associated with CAGRD. And for the remainder is almost 1.15 million acre-feet. It was assumed for this long-term credit, which is over 1 million acre-feet, not associated with the CAGRD, will be removed from the model. That means pumped. So it's not used for any users and not used for agriculture purpose. So I just want to know in the model simulation for this kind of 1.5 million acre-feet pumpage, and how did we use it to offset any demand at all? Otherwise, it's kind of additional pumping. If we pump this water out, we must use it for some purpose, either for agriculture or for municipal or for whatever reason. So I just want to make sure we don't have double, pumping more than we need. We pump, because in the technical memo it said that's not used for agricultural purpose. I just want to see, how this is simulated. Make sure we don't have, over pumping,
So this is something that's actually part of a statutory requirement that prohibits the use of long-term storage credits to support assured water supply determinations unless those credits are the property of the applicant or otherwise being pledged to that specific application. So because those credits are not pledged to any of the issued assured water supply determinations, we had to take those out. Otherwise, they would inevitably be supporting the issued assured water supply determinations effectively. If those credits were pledged to assured water supply determinations, then we would leave those in.
So you can't offset demands with the removal of the long-term storage credits. So we did not simulate that because they weren't pledged to any of the issued designation or determinations.
Okay, so I just, from the numerical standpoint, I want to see once you pump some water out, it must be used for any purpose. So if you have any demand associated with in the future, so we just want to make sure it's not, over pumping. Yeah. Okay.
Right. We were following the rules as Nicole explained.
Hello, Pat Johnson from Atessa. Just have two questions. One, when is the last time, or was it ever done, an actual geological survey of the basin so that we know where the bedrock is?
Okay, so it was done. Yeah. Here, Diane. She's got a microphone for you right here, Diane.
So the geology in the model is mostly based on the statewide depth to bedrock map that AZGS put together, last updated in 2007. Then in the Florence area, we made modifications based on the Superstition Vista study. But most of the modifications that you see, for the majority of where we recently modified it, were based on the study of pumping well logs, where we were able to deepen based on evidence that they were water bearing in the areas that were modified. So it was more an internal ADWR process, not from the geological survey. So,
but that was done in the recent past.
Well, was it done by geologists physically going out and looking at it, or did they just modify their tables on best guess?
Well, Frank Corkill is a professional geologist, and he personally reviewed each and every log he could get a hold of. So yes.
So what logs are he reviewing for that?
Diane, do you have? I think we probably have filed.
The well logs?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. That's what I wanted to know, because I know there's been mistakes on that.
Which is why,
that's because they're human. But basically, what you're doing, you're using a well log to determine depth of bedrock, and that's not right. We know that's not right.
That's not true.
Well, then what are you doing?
We're using that to extend the layer down deeper. But we truncate the places where the depth doesn't reach bedrock. We've in these centers where it's really deep, we would just have the geophysical surveys, which are rough estimates, we admit, but we are truncating because we have one well. It's 3,000 feet, over 3,000 feet deep. So in the other areas, we're using the well logs to extend the bottom deeper, where the well logs indicate that, because they go deeper than what we had the bottom at. So we're extending it down. But so that's.
You've got me totally confused, but that's okay. I'm easily confused. What it sounds like is happening. You're connecting up well logs and estimating the depth to bedrock based on those well logs, and you're deepening it because it could go to 3,000 feet or it may not go to 3,000 feet. And I know that one of the reasons it's not done, and you guys probably know it as well as I do. You don't have any money. I mean, if you keep cutting your budget, you'll never have any. So that's all I want to know about that. The other thing I was wondering about was the chart, if you can find it, again, that had to do with the agricultural demand over the 100 years.
That one?
Yeah, it was on the graph. I think where you showed it was, I think you had a graph that showed it what it was.
This one?
Nah, it starts out at 469 and then goes off where you show.
That one?
Nope.
Oh, that one?
Yeah, there we go. You had 590 and it goes down to 427 in 100 years.
Yes.
What's that percentage decrease?
In my head, 600 to 400, that's probably a little under 30%.
You think that's right over 100 years?
Yes, well, the primary driver was our discussion, as I pointed out, with these two districts. Both they and us, DWR, did an estimate, an estimate of the decrease in acres.
Yeah, and I get that. I'm just going to make one more comment. I'll go sit down and shut up. That's all well and good, but I have been in development business. I've been in Arizona since the 60s, and I'll guarantee you the growth is logarithmic here. And the use of farmland and conversion is logarithmic. That is not. And the districts have a reason for estimating the way they do. So.
Thank you.
I'm Gary Goldwith, Senator Sinema. I'm wondering a bigger picture question. How does this model and subsequent stakeholder meetings, how is that going to play into both the fifth management plan and the post-2025 AMA process?
So in terms of my vision of the stakeholder process, that's going to be an independent process outside of either the fifth management plan or what we might look out post 2026. But I think there could be some connections there in terms of proposed solutions that might get carried forward into the fifth management plan or into the post-2026 discussion. But I don't think we can, I think, again, as we talked about earlier, we see the need for the local stakeholder group to have this process to address their particular issue in Pinal County. In terms of certainly post-2025, that's a broader discussion across all the active management areas. And at least we're starting out in the fifth management plan process with stakeholder groups that are going across all the active management areas as well, based on the user type, municipal, industrial, ag, et cetera. With the idea in the fifth management plan that maybe there will be tailoring to actions within each active management area that would become a subset of that broader process.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
Do we have anyone on the webinar that wanted to ask a question? I'm seeing head shaking no. Anyone else in the audience? Chris?
My question would be for Mr. Inwood. I think at this point I may have misunderstood something in the presentation about recharge, specifically as it relates to what I would assume is municipal recharge. 2014 is my understanding that you modeled everything that was active and then nothing after that, no increase. It's just a flat line after that. Did I understand that today correctly?
The urban, yes. Is that what, in urban, I believe, is the fields, things of that nature. Is that what you're referring to?
Well, I believe so based on page 28 of your report. You call it urban. I think that's what you called it here.
Yes, and we have those constant, the same that was used in the 2014 model.
So again, the assumption is that recharge will not increase in Pinal County over time.
In those categories, that's what we assumed.
Okay. And including projects that were done in 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. Those projects just don't even exist.
We used numbers that were prior to those activities if things happened in those years you just mentioned.
Okay.
Remember too, the model is the grid size is quite large, half mile by half mile. So we're looking at regional scale. We understand if you have local projects, then we have information. We'll definitely incorporate that into future activities, and that could be open for discussion in the stakeholder process as well.
Just to clarify, were you talking about incidental recharge, or were you talking about recharge at underground storage facilities and GSFs?
Correct.
So long-term storage credits accrued at underground storage facilities and GSFs are not available to be relied on by assured water supply applicants unless they've been pledged to a particular determination. So projecting future long-term storage credits at USFs would just require us to pull that volume back out in the simulation unless it's pledged to a specific assured water supply determination.
I was working under the assumption you were just talking about like fields, ball fields and parks and things like that. You're talking about storage facilities, your 1,400 acre foot recharge facility?
Yes, sir.
Right. So we can model those recharge facilities and put them into the model under the circumstances that Aisha just described.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Hello, Keith Brown with the City of Eloy. Just a couple questions. We have a application for modification of our groundwater designation. What I heard, you've used that modification in the model. Is that correct?
Yes, the reduced volume.
So would that presume that that modification is going to be moving forward and we'll be hearing something? We've been waiting to hear something for a long time on that.
Yeah, no, sadly, no, that's still considered in the same position as the rest of the pending applications. We don't think that the model projections support a determination of an assured water supply based on groundwater
But we're looking to reduce our designation, and you've already accepted that as part of the model.
Yes, and even with the reduced volume of groundwater, it still, aside from the unmet demand in Eloy in particular, the groundwater levels exceed the maximum depth to static water level under the rule requirements. So even with the reduction in groundwater demand, it still doesn't meet the requirements.
But that designation has a significant financial impact on us that we're paying for but not getting a benefit out of.
I understand.
But you don't care.
I didn't say that I don't care.
Okay. I guess the other question is, I noticed in the model, Eloy particularly drops down to 1,100 feet when the other surrounding areas are much shallower. And I just would like to understand that better, how that's possible.
You're referring to the depth of water being greater there, all factored to related to pumping. So
is it because there's higher demand there than other areas and we're kind of the lowest?
Well, the demands that are there and where the starting water levels are in the projection period, the combination is what creates the depth of water exceedances. If you start at 100 feet below ground surface and have the same demand as starting at 500 acres or 500 feet below ground surface, you'll have a different ending depth of water. So I don't have the specifics of the different demands in your area versus other areas, but based on the demands that are there, we exceed the depth of water limitations.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? So, seeing none, I want to thank everybody for attending the meeting. We put out a lot of information. We're certainly willing to work with any of you and answer additional questions. I think we are looking forward to seeing the stakeholder process be stood up and having that begin, and we're certainly willing to help that. So, I don't know, Supervisor Miller, if you have any more information about that, not to put you on the spot, but I will.
Steve Miller, Pinal County Supervisor and Chairman of the Stakeholders Group. We've actually preliminarily met once. We're going to meet again on Monday with Representative Cook. We have an outlined draft of our roadmap, so we've already started, and hopefully we'll get the blessings on the 14th. We should have something that all worked out at that point.
Thank you. And just for everybody's information, I got an email for a quorum call for the legislative hearing, a hold the date kind of a thing for the 13th, so it might be the 13th instead of the 14th. I think they're still trying to figure out the specific date. I know Representative Cook mentioned in Florence that it would be the 14th, but I did get the email for the quorum call that indicated it might be the 13th. So keep looking for the date when we get it finalized, and we have it. We'll put it on our website as well when we know that's the final date and a time too. Yeah. So I want to thank everybody again for attending. Again, we're posting everything we talked about today, the presentations, the policy, etc. will be showing up on our website. And again, happy to work with all of you and answer any more of your questions. Lots of detail. But as I started in my introductory remarks, these are situations that the detail really matters. We heard that a lot of that in the Q&A, which I'm very appreciative of, and we will continue to move forward and move down this path and address these issues that have serious implications for stakeholders in Pinal County, landowners, but I think it also spills over into the reputation of our state in general, and we need to solve these problems as soon as we can. So thank you, everyone.